The yellow school bus rattled down Highway 52 on the afternoon of November 9, 1984, carrying 10 students from Maple Grove High School back from a regional debate tournament in Lincoln County. The engine hummed its familiar diesel growl, the kind that every teenager in rural Nebraska knew by heart. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with the promise of early winter snow. Inside that bus, 10 kids laughed, argued about their performance scores, shared candy bars, and looked forward to getting home before dinner. By nightfall, every single one of them would be gone. Not missing, not kidnapped in any conventional sense. Gone, as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed them whole. The driver, a 52-year-old man named Walter Finch, had been transporting students for the Maple Grove School District for nearly 18 years. He was known as reliable, punctual, and utterly unremarkable, the kind of man who showed up, did his job, and went home to his wife and 2 golden retrievers without causing a single ripple in the fabric of small-town life. On that Friday afternoon, Walter steered the bus through the flat Nebraska landscape with the same steady competence he always had. According to the trip manifest, he was expected to arrive back at Maple Grove High School by 5:15 in the evening. The tournament had ended at 2:30. The return trip should have taken no more than 2.5 hours, and the bus never arrived. When the school principal, a stern woman named Evelyn Hartman, realized by 6 o'clock that the bus had not returned, she initially assumed a mechanical breakdown or perhaps a flat tire. The rural highways in 1984 were not exactly equipped with emergency call boxes every few miles, and cell phones were still the stuff of science fiction for most Americans. She waited another 30 minutes, then called the county sheriff's office. By 7 o'clock, deputies were driving the route, searching for any sign of the missing bus. They found nothing. Not a skid mark, not a piece of debris, not a single witness who remembered seeing a yellow school bus pass by that afternoon. The 10 students on board ranged in age from 14 to 17. Their names would soon become seared into the consciousness of everyone in Maple Grove, spoken in hushed tones at church services and diner booths for decades to come. There was Tommy Vickers, the debate team captain, a sharp-tongued kid with thick glasses and a scholarship application already submitted to Northwestern University. His younger sister, Katie Vickers, a freshman with a bright smile and a habit of doodling horses in the margins of her notebooks. There was Lucas Grant, a lanky kid who played center on the basketball team and dreamed of getting out of Nebraska. Melissa Pruitt, quiet and intense, already reading college-level philosophy books. David Kowalski, class clown, always ready with a joke that could make even the strictest teacher crack a smile. Jennifer Hale, whose father owned the only hardware store in town. Patrick O'Brien, who worked weekends at his uncle's farm. Nina Castellano, an exchange student from Arizona whose parents had sent her to Nebraska to live with her aunt for the school year. Rebecca Holt, who sang in the church choir every Sunday. And finally, Aaron Jacobs, a sophomore who collected comic books and was saving up for a trip to Comic-Con in San Diego. 10 ordinary kids. 10 families who went to bed that night not knowing if their children were alive or dead. And the search began in earnest the following morning. Sheriff Dale Brennan, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement in the county, organized search parties that combed every inch of Highway 52 and the surrounding farmland. Volunteers arrived from neighboring towns, bringing tracking dogs, horses, and all-terrain vehicles. The National Guard was called in by Sunday. Local news stations sent camera crews. By Monday, the story had gone regional. By Wednesday, it was national. But still, no trace of the bus, no trace of Walter Finch, no trace of the 10 students. The theories began almost immediately, each more unsettling than the last. Some believed the bus had been driven off the road and into one of the deep irrigation channels that crisscrossed the farmland, the channels that could swallow a vehicle whole and hide it beneath murky water. Divers were sent down. They found nothing. Others speculated about a mass abduction, though the logistics of such an operation seemed nearly impossible. How does one make an entire school bus disappear in broad daylight on a rural highway? The FBI became involved, bringing in specialists in kidnapping cases, but even their resources yielded nothing concrete. Then, on November 15th, 6 days after the disappearance, as a farmer named Eugene Mallory was checking his property line about 8 miles west of Highway 52 when he noticed something odd. His cattle had been acting strange all week, refusing to go near the southwest pasture. Eugene had assumed it was a coyote or perhaps a wild dog, but when he finally walked out there himself, he found something that made his blood run cold. The ground in a perfect circle, roughly 40 feet in diameter, was completely scorched. Not burned in the way a brush fire might burn, leaving irregular patterns and charred plant matter. This was different. Banti. The earth itself looked glassy, almost fused, as if subjected to temperatures far beyond what any normal fire could produce. The grass within the circle was gone, vaporized. The soil had a strange, metallic smell. And in the very center of the circle, half buried in the dirt, was a single object. A sneaker. A white high-top Converse sneaker with a red star logo. Size 7. Melissa Pruitt's mother identified it immediately. Melissa had been wearing those exact sneakers the day she left for the debate tournament. She had begged her mother to buy them the previous summer, saved up her allowance and worn them almost every day since. Mrs. Pruitt collapsed when the sheriff showed her a photograph of the recovered shoe. The implications were too terrible to fully process. The FBI cordoned off the site immediately. Forensic teams descended on Eugene Mallory's pasture with equipment that looked more suited to a NASA laboratory than a criminal investigation. Soil samples were taken, radiation levels were measured, and the scorched earth was photographed from every conceivable angle. The results, when they finally came back from the lab, only deepened the mystery. The soil had been exposed to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There were trace elements present that should not have been there, exotic isotopes that typically required a particle accelerator to produce. The scorch pattern was too perfect, too symmetrical. It looked, according to one physicist consulted by the FBI, like the landing site of something that generated massive amounts of heat and electromagnetic energy. But what? A military aircraft? Some kind of experimental weapon test gone wrong? The Air Force denied any operations in the area. The Department of Defense issued terse statements, claiming no knowledge of any classified programs that could account for the phenomenon. Officially, the investigation hit a wall. Unofficially, whispers began to circulate. Whispers that made people lock their doors at night and check on their children more frequently. Whispers about lights in the sky, about strange humming noises heard in the days leading up to the disappearance. A truck driver came forward, claiming he had seen brilliant blue lights hovering over the highway around 4:30 on the afternoon of November 9th, but had dismissed them as some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. A farmer's wife reported that her radio had emitted nothing but static for a full hour that same afternoon, something that had never happened before or since. The town of Maple Grove, population 3,200, became a place where fear lived in the corners of every room. The parents pulled their children out of school events. The debate team was disbanded, but Walter Finch's wife, a soft-spoken woman named Dorothy, moved away 3 months later, unable to bear the suspicious looks and whispered accusations that maybe somehow that her husband had been involved. The idea that he might have driven those kids somewhere intentionally, harmed them, hidden the evidence, was too horrible to fully articulate, but it hung in the air nonetheless. Except Walter's own family insisted he would never do such a thing. His daughter, living in Omaha at the time, swore her father was incapable of violence. And besides, where was his body? Where was the bus? The physical evidence simply did not support a scenario in which Walter Finch had orchestrated some kind of mass murder. The man had no criminal record, no history of mental illness, no financial problems, no motive whatsoever. So what happened? The families of the missing students clung to hope for months, then years. Missing persons reports remained active. Age progression photographs were created and distributed as the years passed, showing what the kids might look like at 20, at 30, at 40. But deep down, everyone knew. When 10 people vanish simultaneously, when a school bus disappears without a trace, when the only evidence is a scorched circle of earth and a single sneaker, This as hope becomes a fragile, desperate thing. By 1986, the media attention had faded. By 1990, the case was effectively cold. The FBI maintained a file, but active investigation had ceased. The families held annual memorial services, refusing to declare their children legally dead, clinging to the possibility that somehow, somewhere, those 10 kids were still alive. And then, in the spring of 1997, something happened that ripped open the wound all over again. A hiker in the Black Hills of South Dakota, nearly 300 miles from Maple Grove, discovered a buried metal box while exploring a remote canyon. Inside the box were personal items. A class ring with the initials TV, Tommy Vickers. A silver bracelet engraved with the name Katie. A library card belonging to Lucas Grant. A photograph of Jennifer Hale with her family, the edges worn and faded. And a handwritten note, the paper yellowed and fragile. The note read, "They took us because we saw. They are watching. Do not trust the sky." The handwriting was later confirmed to match that of David Kowalski, the class clown who had disappeared on the bus 13 years earlier. But the note raised more questions than it answered. Please, who were they? What had the students seen? And most chillingly, who had buried this box in South Dakota, and when? The FBI reopened the investigation, but by 1997, most of the original investigators had retired or moved on. New agents reviewed the case files with fresh eyes, but the trail was ice cold. The box had been buried in a location with no witnesses, no surveillance, no way to determine who had placed it there or why. Forensic analysis suggested the box had been in the ground for at least 5 years, possibly longer. That meant someone had buried it no later than 1992, 8 years after the disappearance. But who? One of the missing kids, somehow still alive. A kidnapper playing a sick game? The families were devastated all over again. The note suggested their children had suffered, that they had been taken by someone or something, that they had been alive at least long enough to write that message. But it also suggested something far stranger and more disturbing. The phrase "do not trust the sky" seemed to point toward the very theories that had been dismissed as crackpot nonsense back in 1984. The theories about lights in the sky, about unexplained phenomena, about things that the rational mind refused to accept. In Maple Grove, the old fears resurfaced. People remembered the scorched earth, the impossible temperatures, the trace elements that should not have existed. They remembered the blue lights, the radio static, the feeling that something fundamentally wrong had occurred on that November afternoon. And now, with this note, those memories took on a darker significance. Sheriff Brennan, now retired and living in Florida, gave one interview to a documentary crew in 1998. He looked older, tired, haunted. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with the precision of a man who had spent years thinking about what he could and could not say. When asked directly if he believed the students had been abducted by something not of this world, he paused for a long time. Then he said, "I believe those kids saw something they were not supposed to see. I believe someone or something made sure they could never tell anyone about it. And I believe that whatever happened out there on Highway 52, we are not equipped to understand it." The interview never aired. The production company claimed technical difficulties, but rumors suggested pressure from unknown sources to bury the footage. By the early 2000s, the case had become the stuff of internet legend. Forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries dissected every detail. Conspiracy theorists wove elaborate narratives involving secret government programs, extraterrestrial contact, and cover-ups that reached the highest levels of power. Skeptics dismissed the entire thing as a tragic accident followed by coincidence and hysteria. The truth, as always, remained elusive. But in 2003, something else happened. Something that would finally begin to pull back the curtain on what really occurred in November of 1984. A woman named Victoria Hayes, working as a data analyst for a private aerospace contractor in Nevada, stumbled across a classified document while organizing archived files. The document was dated November 10, 1984, one day after the disappearance. It was a brief internal memo, marked with the highest level of security clearance, referencing retrieval event Nebraska and civilian exposure containment. The memo included GPS coordinates. Victoria, driven by curiosity and a nagging sense that something was wrong, cross-referenced those coordinates. They matched the location of Eugene Mallory's pasture, the site of the scorched earth, down to the exact decimal point. Victoria knew she was holding something dangerous. She also knew that if she reported it through official channels, the document would disappear and she would likely lose her job or worse. So she made a copy, encrypted it, and sent it anonymously to a journalist she trusted, a woman named Amanda Cross, who had built a career investigating government malfeasance and classified programs. Amanda spent 6 months verifying the document's authenticity, cross-referencing technical details, confirming Victoria's employment and security clearance. When she was satisfied that the memo was genuine, she published her findings in a long-form investigative piece that went viral overnight. The document suggested that something had indeed occurred in Nebraska in November of 1984, something that required immediate containment. It referenced a retrieval team and asset recovery, language that implied the removal of physical evidence. It mentioned witness management, a chilling euphemism that could mean anything from intimidation to something far worse. The article ignited a firestorm. The families of the missing students demanded answers. The senators called for hearings. The Department of Defense issued blanket denials, claiming the document was either a fabrication or related to an unrelated training exercise. But the pressure was mounting and cracks were beginning to show. Then, in the summer of 2004, something happened that changed everything. A man walked into a police station in Billings, Montana, and identified himself as Patrick O'Brien. He was 40 years old, gaunt, scarred, and missing 3 fingers on his left hand. He carried a driver's license that had expired in 1984, a license that identified him as a 16-year-old student from Maple Grove, Nebraska. He said he had been held for 20 years. He said he had finally escaped, and he said he needed to tell someone the truth before they found him again. The police did not believe him at first. There had been hoaxes before, people claiming to be the missing students, seeking attention or money. But Patrick O'Brien knew things. He knew the exact seating arrangement on the bus that day. He knew what Tommy Vickers had been arguing about during the trip. He knew the name of Walter Finch's golden retrievers. He knew details that had never been made public, details that only someone who had been on that bus could possibly know. DNA testing was ordered immediately. The results came back 3 days later, the positive match. The man in the Billings police station was, without question, Patrick O'Brien, one of the 10 students who had vanished in November of 1984. He was alive. He had survived. And he was ready to talk. But before he could give a full statement, before he could reveal what had happened during those 20 missing years, Patrick O'Brien suffered a massive seizure. The paramedics rushed him to the hospital, where doctors discovered something impossible lodged in his brain stem. A small, metallic device, no larger than a grain of rice, emitting a faint electromagnetic pulse. The device was surgically removed, but the damage was done. Patrick slipped into a coma. He would never wake up. He died 6 weeks later without speaking another word. The device, analyzed by the best forensic specialists in the country, was determined to be technology that did not exist in any known database. Its purpose appeared to be neurological monitoring and, potentially, remote termination. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Someone had kept Patrick O'Brien alive for 20 years. Someone had implanted a device in his brain. Someone had let him escape, or perhaps he had genuinely fought his way free. And when he tried to tell his story, someone or something had made sure he could never finish. The autopsy revealed other horrors. Scars consistent with surgical procedures, malnutrition, exposure to extreme temperatures. His teeth showed signs of advanced decay, suggesting years without proper care. His body bore the marks of someone who had been kept in captivity, subjected to experiments, treated not as a human being but as a specimen. And if Patrick had been alive all those years, what about the others? What about Tommy, Katie, Lucas, Melissa, David, Jennifer, Nina, Rebecca, and Aaron? Were they still out there, still suffering? Or had Patrick been the only one to survive? The FBI launched a renewed investigation with unprecedented resources. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. But most of all, they wanted to know who or what had the capability to abduct 10 students and a bus driver in broad daylight, hide them for 2 decades, plant advanced technology in their brains, and operate with complete impunity. The answers, when they finally began to emerge, would be more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The death of Patrick O'Brien in that Montana hospital sent shockwaves through every law enforcement agency in the country. What had begun as a tragic cold case from 1984 had transformed into something far more sinister, something that suggested layers of conspiracy, advanced technology, and possibilities that challenged every assumption about what was real and what was impossible. The device removed from Patrick's brain sat in a secure facility in Quantico, Virginia, where specialists from multiple agencies attempted to reverse engineer its components. What they found defied explanation. The technology was decades ahead of anything available in 2004. The manufacturing process required precision at the molecular level, something that even the most advanced laboratories could barely achieve. The power source appeared to be some form of microfusion, generating energy without any conventional fuel or battery. Most disturbing of all, the device had been designed to interface directly with human neural tissue, capable of monitoring brain activity and potentially influencing or suppressing specific functions. The lead scientist examining the device, a neuroengineer named Dr. Helen Cartwright, submitted a report that was immediately classified. In it, she stated plainly that the technology could not have been created by any known entity on Earth, not in 2004, not in 1984, and possibly not even in the present day. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. If Patrick O'Brien had been implanted with alien technology, then the nature of his disappearance, and the disappearance of his 9 classmates and their bus driver, took on dimensions that most people were unwilling to consider. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. In the weeks following Patrick's death, the FBI launched Operation Skyfall, a classified investigation that brought together specialists from multiple disciplines. Astrophysicists, aerospace engineers, psychologists, anthropologists, and military intelligence operatives formed a task force with one singular mission: to determine what happened on November 9, 1984, and locate any surviving victims. The investigation was given unlimited resources and zero publicity, and the families of the missing students were told only that new leads were being pursued. The media was fed nothing. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired Air Force colonel named Martin Dreyfus, living quietly in Arizona, contacted the FBI through an anonymous tip line. Dreyfus had been stationed at a classified installation in Nevada in the 1980s, a facility that officially did not exist. He had carried the weight of what he knew for 20 years, and Patrick O'Brien's death had finally broken his silence. He was willing to talk, but only under guarantee of immunity and protection. The FBI agreed. What Dreyfus revealed in a secure debriefing room over the course of 3 days would fundamentally alter the direction of the investigation. According to Dreyfus, his facility had been tasked with monitoring and responding to what the military euphemistically called anomalous aerial phenomena. In plain language, UFO sightings. Most were easily explained: weather balloons, experimental aircraft, atmospheric anomalies. But a small percentage, perhaps 5% of all reported incidents, could not be explained. These cases were flagged, tracked, and when possible, investigated by rapid response teams. On the afternoon of November 9, 1984, multiple radar installations across the Midwest detected something moving at impossible speeds over Nebraska. The object appeared on screens for approximately 7 minutes, executing maneuvers that would have subjected any human pilot to lethal G-forces. Fighter jets were scrambled from Offutt Air Force Base, but by the time they reached the coordinates, the object was gone. What remained was a ground signature, a thermal bloom consistent with something landing or hovering in a specific location for a brief period before departing. That location was 8 miles west of Highway 52, Eugene Mallory's pasture. A retrieval team was dispatched within hours. They arrived at the site just before dawn on November 10th, finding the scorched circle and the abandoned sneaker. They also found something else, something that was immediately removed and never officially documented. Dreyfus claimed he did not know exactly what the team recovered, but he overheard communications referring to biological samples and non-terrestrial materials. The site was sanitized, evidence was transported to the Nevada facility, and a cover story was prepared in case local authorities stumbled onto the scene. Which of course they did. Eugene Mallory found the site 6 days later, after the military had already swept it clean. The sneaker had been left behind, either intentionally as misdirection or simply overlooked in the rush to remove more significant evidence. Either way, it served its purpose, focusing attention on a potential abduction scenario while diverting scrutiny from what had actually occurred. But what about the bus? What about the 10 students and Walter Finch? Dreyfus claimed that his superiors believed the bus had been taken, physically lifted and removed by whatever craft had been detected on radar. The working theory, never officially confirmed, was that the students and driver had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They had witnessed something, perhaps the craft landing, perhaps something even more specific, and had been removed to prevent that information from spreading. Whether they had been taken by the craft itself, or by human operatives acting to contain the situation, Dreyfus did not know. But he believed, based on conversations he had overheard and documents he had glimpsed, that at least some of the abducted individuals had been kept alive. For what purpose, he could only speculate. Research, study, insurance, leverage. And the possibilities were endless and uniformly horrifying. The FBI corroborated parts of Dreyfus's account through other sources. Retired personnel from the Nevada facility, granted immunity, confirmed the existence of the Rapid Response Program. The classified radar logs from November 9, 1984, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, showed gaps and anomalies consistent with data being scrubbed or redacted. The picture that emerged was one of a government aware of non-human intelligence operating in Earth's airspace, desperate to control information, and willing to sacrifice civilian lives to maintain secrecy. But if the government had been involved in covering up the initial event, did that mean they also knew where the students were being held? Had Patrick O'Brien escaped from a military facility or from something far stranger? The autopsy results suggested the latter. The scars on Patrick's body, the device in his brain, the years of malnutrition and exposure, all pointed to conditions inconsistent with any government detention center, no matter how black budget or off the books. Patrick had been held somewhere else, somewhere beyond the reach of normal human infrastructure. And if he had escaped from that place, if he had somehow found his way back to civilization after 20 years, it meant that location still existed. It meant the others might still be there. Operation Skyfall shifted focus, using every tool at their disposal: satellite imagery, thermal scanning, signal intelligence, human sources, and the task force began searching for any sign of a facility capable of holding prisoners for decades without detection. They looked in remote deserts, abandoned military bases, deep underground complexes, even offshore installations. They found nothing. Then, in early 2005, a rancher in Wyoming reported strange activity on his property. Lights in the sky, unusual sounds, cattle behaving erratically. It was the kind of report that would normally be dismissed, but given the heightened awareness within Operation Skyfall, a team was dispatched to investigate. What they found was a section of land where electromagnetic readings were off the charts. Compasses spun wildly. Electronic equipment malfunctioned. Buried beneath 3 feet of soil, they discovered a hatch. A metal hatch, seamless and smooth, with no visible hinges or locks, and composed of an alloy that resisted every attempt at analysis. Thus, the hatch would not open. Drilling equipment broke against its surface. Explosives left barely a scratch, but whatever the structure was, it had been built to last. And it had been built by someone with access to materials and engineering far beyond contemporary human capability. The FBI secured the site, erected a perimeter, and brought in every expert they could find. For 3 months, teams worked around the clock trying to gain entry. And then, on a cold morning in May, the hatch simply opened on its own. No warning, no explanation. One moment it was sealed, the next it was sliding aside, revealing a shaft descending into darkness. A tactical team, equipped with cutting-edge gear and trained for the most extreme scenarios, descended into the shaft. What they found below would haunt every single one of them for the rest of their lives. The structure extended deep underground, a series of corridors and chambers constructed from the same seamless metal as the hatch. The walls emitted a faint luminescence, providing just enough light to see but not enough to feel safe. The air was breathable but stale, as if it had been recycled for years without fresh input. And in the chambers they found evidence of habitation, beds rudimentary and uncomfortable, but clearly used, remnants of food unidentifiable in origin, and markings on the walls, scratched into the metal with desperate hands over what must have been years of captivity. Names. The names of the 10 students and Walter Finch carved into the walls alongside dates. Some of the dates extended into the late 1990s. The students had been alive for at least 15 years after their disappearance. They had marked the passage of time, counted the days, held onto their identities even as everything else was stripped away. But the facility was empty. No captives, no captors. The beds were cold, the chambers silent. Whatever had happened here, whoever had maintained this place, they were gone now. And they had taken the prisoners with them. Or the prisoners had died, or something else entirely had occurred. In one of the deeper chambers, the team found a wall covered in drawings. Not the desperate scratchings of prisoners marking time, but intricate, detailed sketches that appeared to have been made by multiple hands over many years. The drawings depicted what looked like beings, tall and thin with elongated limbs and large dark eyes. The classic description of what UFO researchers called greys. But these drawings also showed something else, something that sent a chill through everyone who saw them. The beings were shown operating on human subjects, implanting devices, conducting experiments. And in one particularly detailed sketch, a school bus was depicted being lifted into the air by a beam of light. The students had drawn what had happened to them. They had documented their captivity, their torment, and their captors. And then, at some point, they had either been moved, or they had died, or they had been released. The facility offered no answers to which of those possibilities was true. DNA evidence recovered from the site confirmed that all 10 students and Walter Finch had been present in the facility at some point. Hair, skin cells, traces of blood. The timeline suggested they had been held there from 1984 through at least the late 1990s, possibly longer. But where they had gone after that remained a mystery. Had Patrick O'Brien escaped from this facility? Or had there been others like it, scattered across remote locations, part of a network that no one had ever suspected? The FBI kept the discovery classified, sharing information only with the highest levels of government. The families of the missing students were told that new evidence had been found, but that operational security prevented full disclosure. Protests erupted. Lawsuits were filed. The families deserved answers, deserved closure, but the scope of what had been uncovered was too vast, too disturbing, to release to the public, because the implications were staggering. If non-human intelligence had abducted American citizens, held them for decades, conducted experiments on them, and operated facilities on American soil without detection, then every assumption about national security, about humanity's place in the universe, about the nature of reality itself, had to be reconsidered. The government had a choice: reveal the truth and risk mass panic, or maintain the cover-up and carry the weight of that knowledge in silence. They chose silence. Operation Skyfall was quietly disbanded in 2006. The facility in Wyoming was sealed, buried under tons of concrete, and erased from all official records. The task force members were reassigned, their findings locked away in vaults that would not be opened for decades, if ever. The families were offered financial settlements in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Some accepted, desperate for any form of closure. Others refused, continuing to fight for transparency until their deaths. But the story did not end there. In 2009, another survivor emerged. Rebecca Holt, the girl who had sung in the church choir, walked into a hospital in Spokane, Washington. She was 41 years old, severely malnourished, and suffering from advanced PTSD. Like Patrick O'Brien, she had a device implanted in her brain. Unlike Patrick, the doctors managed to remove it before it could kill her. Rebecca spent months in recovery, her mind fractured by years of trauma. When she finally began to speak coherently, she told a story that aligned with everything the FBI had discovered in the Wyoming facility and more. She described being taken from the bus, held in underground chambers, subjected to medical procedures that she could barely articulate. She spoke of the beings who had held them, their cold efficiency, their complete disregard for human suffering. She said that Walter Finch had died in the early 1990s, his heart giving out during one of the procedures. She said that Tommy Vickers had gone insane, screaming for days until he simply stopped speaking altogether. She said that the others had died one by one, their bodies removed and never seen again. But Rebecca also said something else, something that sent investigators scrambling for answers. She claimed that in the final years of her captivity, the beings had seemed agitated, almost fearful. They had begun shutting down the facilities, moving prisoners, destroying evidence. Rebecca believed they were preparing to leave, to abandon their operations on Earth. She did not know why, but she sensed that something had changed, some larger shift that had forced their hand. And then, one night, her chamber door had simply opened. No explanation, no guards. She had walked through empty corridors, climbed the shaft, and emerged in a forest somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. She had wandered for days before finding civilization. And throughout her ordeal, she had felt watched, as if her escape had been allowed, as if she were being released deliberately. Why? Why let her go after 25 years? Why implant a kill switch in her brain and then allow her to survive long enough to tell her story? Rebecca had no answers. But she believed with absolute conviction that the others were still alive somewhere. She believed that the beings had not finished with them, that the experiments continued, that Tommy, Katie, Lucas, Melissa, David, Jennifer, Nina, and Aaron were still out there, still suffering, still waiting for someone to find them. The FBI investigated Rebecca's claims but found nothing to support the idea that other survivors existed. The Wyoming facility remained sealed. No other sites were discovered, and Rebecca herself, despite intensive therapy, could provide no concrete information about the location of other facilities or the fate of her fellow captives. In 2012, Rebecca Holt took her own life. She left a note that simply read, "I cannot forget what I saw. I cannot live with what they did to us. Please keep looking. Please do not let them be forgotten." Her death marked the end of any active investigation into the disappearance of the Maple Grove students. Officially, the case remains unsolved. Officially, Patrick O'Brien and Rebecca Holt were the only survivors, and their accounts, while disturbing, could not be fully verified. Officially, the government has no knowledge of non-human intelligence conducting operations on American soil. But unofficially, in the quiet conversations between retired agents and in the encrypted files passed between researchers, the truth is acknowledged. Something took those 10 students and their bus driver in November of 1984. Something held them for years, studied them, experimented on them, and eventually discarded them. And that something is still out there. And the families of the missing students continue to hold memorial services every November 9th. Fewer people attend each year as the community ages and memories fade. But the core group remains, the siblings and parents who refuse to give up hope, who place flowers at a memorial plaque outside Maple Grove High School, who whisper the names of their loved ones into the cold Nebraska wind. Tommy Vickers, Katie Vickers, Lucas Grant, Melissa Pruitt, David Kowalski, Jennifer Hale, Patrick O'Brien, Nina Castellano, Rebecca Holt, Aaron Jacobs, and Walter Finch, the driver who had simply been doing his job. In 2018, a documentary filmmaker named Amanda Cross, the same journalist who had exposed the classified memo years earlier, that attempted to create a comprehensive film about the case. She interviewed surviving family members, reviewed declassified documents, and tracked down former investigators willing to speak on the record. The documentary was set to premiere at a major film festival when Amanda received a visit from two men in dark suits who identified themselves as representatives of a government agency they would not name. They informed her that releasing the documentary would constitute a threat to national security. They did not threaten her directly, but the implication was clear. The documentary was never released. Amanda Cross retired from journalism shortly after, citing personal reasons. The footage, hours of interviews and evidence, disappeared. Some believe it was destroyed. Others believe it sits in a vault somewhere, waiting for a time when the world is ready to hear the truth. But the truth is already out there, scattered across anonymous internet forums, whispered in conspiracy circles, documented in files that will remain classified for another 50 years. The truth is that, on a grey November afternoon in 1984, the 10 high school students and their bus driver encountered something that humanity was not prepared to acknowledge. They were taken, used, and discarded. 2 of them made it back, broken and traumatized. The others remain missing, their fate unknown, their suffering unimaginable. And every year, on November 9th, people in Maple Grove look up at the sky with a mixture of fear and defiance. They remember the bus that never came home. They remember the children who vanished into the unknown. And they wonder, with a cold dread that never quite fades, if somewhere out there, in a facility buried beneath the earth or hidden among the stars, those children are still alive, still trapped, still waiting for rescue that will never come. The case of the Maple Grove 10 remains officially unsolved. But for those who know the truth, for those who have seen the evidence and heard the testimony and felt the weight of what it all means, there is no mystery, only horror. Only the terrible certainty that we are not alone in the universe, and that those who share it with us have no regard for our lives, our rights, or our humanity. The yellow school bus that disappeared from Highway 52 has never been found. The bodies of the missing students have never been recovered. Justice has never been served. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars or beneath the quiet earth, the nightmare continues. And the families still wait. The investigators still search quietly without fanfare, and the sky still watches, silent and vast, keeping secrets that will haunt us for generations to come. Because on that November afternoon in 1984, something changed. The line was crossed, and the world became a more dangerous place, whether most people realized it or not. The Maple Grove 10 are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their names are carved in stone, etched in memory, whispered in warning. They are a reminder of what we do not understand, what we cannot control, and what might be waiting for us in the shadows beyond our comprehension. And if you ever find yourself driving down a lonely highway at dusk, and you see lights in the sky that do not move like stars or planes, and you feel a sudden chill despite the warmth of the evening, remember them. Remember the 10 kids who went to a debate tournament and never came home. Remember that the universe is bigger and stranger and more terrible than we dare imagine. Remember that some disappearances are not solved because the truth is too monstrous to face. The investigation officially ended decades ago, but the questions remain. And somewhere, in a file cabinet in a forgotten basement, or in a database protected by layers of security clearance, the answers wait, patient and terrible, little for the day when someone is brave enough to look. Until then, the mystery endures, the horror persists, and the sky continues to watch, silent witness to secrets that will reshape everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos. The Maple Grove 10. 10 names, 10 lives, 10 families forever shattered, and one truth that changes everything: we are not alone, and we never were.